at 6 to 8 weeks. 25% of those were exclusively breastfed. This, unfortunately, is very similar to the breastfeeding rates of 10 years ago, so we don't seem to be any nearer hitting the target of 50% at 6 weeks. And that's despite the passage of Elaine Smith's bill, and I, like others, believe that no more needs to be done to promote the advantages of the breastfeeding and to actually point out that this legislation needs to be used and publicised. I also think we need to dispel some of the negative information which deters too many women from even considering breastfeeding. I think one of those factors is the perception that breastfeeding is bound to be very difficult and very sore. I mean, it can be for some women, and as Elaine Smith said, a small proportion of women are actually unable to breastfeed at all, and that should be understood. But most women can breastfeed, and some women find breastfeeding very easy and very straightforward. And actually, I was one of them. I had 3 children, breastfed them all until they all decided that they wanted to give up. And I have absolutely no recollection of finding it very difficult. Birth was another matter, I have to say. Having the opportunity to breastfeed on demand, however, was another matter. My children are now 28, 26 and 24, and in those days breastfeeding in public places was pretty difficult unless you were wearing a suitably encompassing and camouflaging garment. I also returned to work full-time when my eldest child was 4 months old. My son's childminder was actually very supportive and had breastfed all 5 of her children, but I had to express milk for my son in a toilet at work. And I've never prepared anybody else's meal in a toilet, not even the dog's meal. But let's talk. The other thing I want to draw attention to is these weight charts, which actually indicated that children should put on double their weight at a certain time and triple their weight another time. Those don't work for a breastfeeding child. Breastfed children don't put on weight as fast, and that ought to be understood so that breastfeeding mothers don't feel that somehow they're not giving enough nutrition to their children. But there are a whole load of advantages, I believe. Most importantly, the child's health, as others have said. Actually, my youngest son was born during a norovirus epidemic, which was pretty worrying because, for newborns born at that time, and all 5 of our family managed to get it. My 6-week-old baby was actually the least ill of all of us because he was getting my antibodies. It actually protected him, unlike other children of that age. And night feeding, I think, was easy. There's no messing around with heating up bottles to the right temperature and all that nonsense. I could almost literally do it in my sleep. Not that I would necessarily recommend it. Partners obviously can't be much help with the feeding, but there are other nighttime jobs like changing nappies and so on that they can assist with. And then also there's the weight loss as well. I went back to my pre-pregnancy weight fairly quickly after having given birth. And I have to say, all my children were born during the Christmas and New Year period, and I was able to have all the Christmas goodies, the chocolates, the cheese, the Christmas cake, everything else, and still lose weight. Happy days, which never came back, unfortunately. So altogether, I would say breastfeeding is great for babies, great for their mothers. More needs to be done to enable more mums to breastfeed and to portray breastfeeding as a positive choice, to enable people to positively choose, to choose the most natural way possible of nourishing their babies.
Many thanks. Now call on Jane Baxter, to be followed by Mary Scanlon.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And thank you too to Elaine Smith for securing today's debate and for all her years of campaigning to encourage and support breastfeeding in Scotland, particularly, of course, in bringing forward the Breastfeeding Act. And I'm proud that there have been a number of other progressive advances in legislation and policy over the years to support increases in breastfeeding rates. Most women giving birth in Scotland today know about the multiple benefits breastfeeding brings, and most women giving birth in Scotland today also intend to breastfeed their baby. However, this good news is tempered by the fact that overall breastfeeding rates are static, and NCT research shows that high rates of mothers stop breastfeeding or move to mixed feeding before they want to. So policy intended to educate expectant parents about the benefits of breastfeeding would seem to be working, but it's clearly just one part of the story. Without being situated within a culture that actively supports, understands and enables breastfeeding, this policy remains stunted in its potential to transform breastfeeding initiation rates and how long mothers breastfeed for. Further progress in employment practice, childcare arrangements and effective support networks will help to bring about this change. But we also need to face up to persisting attitudes towards women's bodies and women's choices. I'd like to stand here and say that it's incredible that a woman like Emily Slough can be labelled a tramp for breastfeeding her child in a public place. But we live in a society that plasters boobs everywhere in a sexual context, where women's bodies are reduced to an image that society at large can appropriate for comment and criticism, and where mothers feel exposed and judged on a daily basis. While we are getting better at telling mothers about the benefits of breastfeeding and providing support for breastfeeding, we are also falling short at speaking to people more widely. This debate today is an important part of the discussion about how we tackle negative attitudes about not just breastfeeding, but women more generally. Elaine Smith's suggestion of promoting the legislation across the country is entirely sensible. For it's not just new mothers who need to know they live in a country that in theory supports breastfeeding. The country they live in must support it in practice. It demands a multifaceted approach. The more people see breastfeeding in public, the more normal it will become. And the more normal it becomes, the more people will feel they can breastfeed in public. While we work on changing attitudes in general sense, we can work within the space we have to get more women breastfeeding, and that's precisely what's happening in Fife. We know that women least likely to breastfeed are younger women and women living in low-income areas. NHS Fife's Breastfeeding Peer Support Project has driven up breastfeeding in deprived areas, and all of Fife's community health partnerships have just been awarded the UNICEF Stage 3 award. The team in Fife also recognise that, whilst unfair, many women do feel embarrassed and unsure about breastfeeding in public. So it provides a guide for new parents listing public places in Fife that actively support breastfeeding. The more mums just do it, the more it will seem like just a thing to do, and that will change culture over time. Fife knows that the only approach that works is one that puts the mother at the centre, which is why it's crucial that initiatives like this continue to receive direct funding from the government. Women who breastfeed in public should not have to cover it up or apologise for it. Women who breastfeed should not be seen as tramps or pushy middle-class mums. They should be seen as people feeding another little person. It really is that simple. I think most people in Scotland recognise that it's in everyone's interest that infants receive the nutrition that will give them the very best start in life. It's our collective responsibility to address the attitudes towards breastfeeding, not just in expectant couples, but in society at large. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And due to the large number of members still wishing to speak in the debate, I'm minded to accept a motion under Rule 8.14.3 that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. Would you like to move? Thank you very much. So I put the question, are we agreed that we'll just extend the debate? Please. Thank you. So we are agreed, and I now call on Mary Scanlon to be followed by Dr Richard Simpson.
Thank you. Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would also like to thank Elaine Smith for securing this debate and outlining so many of the benefits of breastfeeding. As others have said, Elaine has been a long-term ambassador for breastfeeding. In fact, I remember nagging my daughter to breastfeed her first child, who was born in 2001, and I proudly reported back to Elaine when the Parliament was up the road that my daughter did breastfeed for several months as a result. But listening to Cara Hilton also reminded me of when my children were born in Dundee Royal Infirmary around 40 years ago, and indeed I was the only mum on the Florence Nightingale type wards of nearly 30 women who was breastfeeding. So it's interesting to see how little has changed. But like others, I condemn the action taken against Emily Slough in Staffordshire, with a photograph taken without her permission being placed on a social networking site and with all the disrespectful comments. However, I'm not sure if this incident would in fact have been in breach of the Breastfeeding Scotland Act 2005. And I say I'm not sure, perhaps the Minister will make that clear. But as the motion states, the Breastfeeding Act makes it illegal to stop or attempt to stop mothers breastfeeding in public. It would certainly have been in breach of the tone and intention of the Act and the regulations, which state that it's about reassuring mothers and to help breastfeeding in public become a social norm. Elaine Smith mentioned the Breastfeeding Act. However, I think, like so often in this Parliament, it's not about the legislation. The legislation is fine. It's how that legislation is enforced and implemented that really does matter. The benefits to both babies and mothers are well stated, have been well stated by all speakers on this topic, from protecting babies from common childhood diseases and, as Elaine Murray said, helping mothers return to their pre-pregnancy weight. However, one of the most important benefits has to be the convenience of no bottles and no sterilisation, as well, of course, as the constant supply. But I feel I have to say I recognise, and I'm a very strong advocate of breastfeeding, but I've also been aware of many mothers who want to breastfeed and they do find it difficult. So I think we do need to recognise that too. I found it very interesting to... Yeah.
Lane Smith.
Thank Mary Scanlon for taking the intervention. Just on that point, would you then recognise with me that support from professionals is absolutely vital?
Mary Scanlon.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I think quite often it's about freeing up the bed in hospital. I don't expect people to stay in for 4 days, as Cara Hilton said, but they could be given that help and support at home, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. But it is interesting to note also that older mothers are more likely to breastfeed than young mothers. In 2012-13 in Scotland, for mothers under 20, I was surprised that only 5% breastfed their babies at 6 to 8 weeks, compared to 34% of mothers aged 40 and over. But as others said, the main statistic here is that 41% of mothers in the least deprived areas were exclusively breastfeeding at 6 to 8 weeks, 3 times greater than mothers in the most deprived areas. And when you consider the cost of infant formula, that is undoubtedly an area where I think Elaine Smith said more support, more awareness and more help could be given. So Scotland still does compare favourably with Wales and Northern Ireland in terms of breastfeeding, and we're only 2% behind England in terms of exclusive breastfeeding at 6 weeks. But I think we can do better. But like others, I commend Elaine Smith on bringing this debate to the Parliament and for helping us all to raise awareness of breastfeeding. There is no doubting the health benefits to baby and mother, but also, as Elaine Smith said, it should not be lost the savings to the public purse and, of course, the savings to families, which I've mentioned, particularly from the most deprived backgrounds. So, Presiding Officer, more can be done to encourage and support more women to breastfeed, and also to make breastfeeding in public the social norm, as Jane Baxter said. And I do hope that this debate will go some way to helping to achieve this.
Many thanks. Now call on Dr Richard Simpson to be followed by Duncan McNeill.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I join others by congratulating Elaine Smith on obtaining this member's debate? As others have already said, Elaine has made this a core issue for her over the entire length of the Parliament, including, of course, her Members' Bill, which has changed some of the public perception, but more, I think, needs to be done. The publication in 2011 of Improving Maternal and Infant Nutrition, a Framework for Action, was a useful document. And I think this should now be seen in the context of the Early Years Collaborative as it develops, and also the Family Nurse Partnership, amongst other initiatives. Its adoption of the World Health Organization's view that breastfeeding should be exclusive in the first 6 months was also welcome. But there is recognition in the report that breastfeeding is not only crucial for the development of the infant, but for the good health in the future of the mother, including, of course, as others have already mentioned, a return to pre-pregnancy weight, which is something of increasing importance as obesity becomes ever more prevalent within Scotland. The infants who do get the immunological benefit of breast milk, which cannot be supplied by formula milk, do have reduced risks of ear, respiratory, gastrointestinal and urinary tract infections, allergic disease including eczema, asthma and wheezing, type 1 diabetes, and they're also much less likely to be overweight, again contributing to the major public health issue of obesity. Furthermore, infants who are breastfed are less at risk of childhood leukemia and sudden unexplained infant death, and there may also be an association with improved cognitive development. Preterm babies that are breastfed are likely to have better eyesight and brain development than those who are not, and have a reduced risk of necrotizing enterocolitis. The factors associated with influencing breastfeeding are many and varied, but particularly for preterm babies where there is considerable difficulty and they may have to be, I think as Cara Hilton said, tube fed, as happened